Is Kevin. I'm one of the pastors here, and that was kind of painful, wasn't it? That was actually kind of a little hard to watch, to be honest with you. We started a series called Nailed It last week, and it's a look at the wisdom of the book of Proverbs. And our hope, as we've been studying it this summer, is that, you could avoid some painful decisions in life. Now, you might not be doing anything quite that crazy, but we all make decisions in life, and sometimes we make the wrong decision, and sometimes those decisions can be a little bit painful. And so before we go into the message and we start to talk a little bit about that, I just want to mention this card. You guys probably got one of these as you were walking in, and I just want to say we have an awesome high school program here, and we've got a new program starting in the fall called C4 Sunday Nights, and it's going to be a blast. If you're a high schooler, if you know a high schooler, this is really important. I would love for you to pass it out to someone else, and just look forward to that because it's going to be really great. So, but now, those videos that you just saw, kind of embarrassing for those folks, right? I mean, you'd be a little embarrassed if something like that happened to you. But I want to tell you a story, a true story, that's actually maybe even more embarrassing than some of those videos. This is the true story of Roy Riegels. It's January 1st, 1929. We're in Southern California. It's an 80-degree day. It's a beautiful day. And this is the biggest football game that's going to happen all year. It's the Rose Bowl. This is back in the day before the NFL even happened. And so, college football was huge then. It was even bigger than it is now. And there were 70,000 fans waiting to see the undefeated Georgia Tech team play against the University of California, who had one loss. So this was huge. This was an epic game. And so as the game started, it was a tight game. It was a defensive battle. They were at it. And as they were going through, it was scoreless in the first quarter. And then the second quarter came, and it was scoreless again. This was a really tight game. And then all of a sudden, the Georgia Tech running back fumbled the ball. His name was Stumpy, actually. Stumpy fumbled the ball, and Roy Riegels, the outstanding linebacker from the University of California, was there to recover. And he knew what to do. He broke a tackle, and he ran as fast as he could for the end zone. And people were roaring, and except there was one problem. He ran 75 yards the wrong direction. The tackle that happened after that resulted in a safety that proved decisive in the University of California losing that game 9-7. And after that, reporters came up to Roy Riegels and they said, "Roy, what happened out there on the field?" And he said, "I don't know. I mean, pivoting from a defender, I kind of got bumped and I completely lost my bearings. I went the wrong way." And from that day forward, Roy was known as Wrong Way Riegels. That was his name from that moment. Now, I'm here to say that if we're to be honest, we all have a little bit of Roy Riegels in us, don't we? I mean, we might not want to admit it. We might not want to remember those moments in our lives, but every one of us has done something that we wish that we could undo in our lives. Some of those things are funny. Some of those things we can laugh about. But sometimes the unwise decisions in our lives affect us for years to come. Sometimes those unwise decisions hurt the people that we love in our lives. Sometimes there are things that we just wish we could forget or erase. And now, if you think about this. Roy Riegels, he had the best of intentions, right? I mean, he wanted to score a touchdown for his team. That was what he decided he wanted to do. Sadly, though, he just went the wrong direction despite the intention that he had to score. And so he illustrates perfectly what we're going to talk about this morning, which is something called the path principle. And this is what the path principle says. It says this, that your direction, not your intention, determines your destination. You guys think you could say that with me? Let's all say it together. Your direction, not your intention, determines your destination. That was great. So Andy Stanley is an author, and he wrote a book about this. He's a pastor as well. He wrote a book about this called The Path Principle. If you're looking for a great summer read, I recommend it. It's a really great book. And he unpacks this concept as I was reading this really, really well for this message. And so when you hear of this principle, you probably think to yourself, you know what, that's not rocket science. So it's like, I'm not that surprised by this. We all know this. Think about it. I mean, if you were planning a trip to Florida and you're going on vacation, right, and you had everything ready for it. I mean, you're going to Disney World, you've got the Mickey ears packed, you've got your sunscreen packed, you got your playlist ready to go, and the moment comes, you get your kids in the car and you head out and you start driving. But then when you get to the highway, to 95, you head north instead of heading south. Like, you're going to vacation in Canada, not to Florida at that point, right? I mean, we're not that surprised by this. But like, as obvious as that sounds and seems in our life, we mess this up all the time. There's a disconnect between our intentions and our direction in life, and we have this weird inclination for choosing paths in our lives that don't lead in the direction that we actually want to go. Have you noticed this? I see it all the time, and to be honest with you, it breaks my heart that people don't make this connection between the outcomes that they experience and the decisions that they made to get there. And people will come to me and they'll share something that's going on in their lives. It always starts the same way. They say, Kevin, I don't know how I got here. I don't understand how I find myself in this place. See, we're all going to end up somewhere in our lives. Some of you are going to end up where you're going to end up on purpose. It's going to be exactly where you wanted to be. And some of you are going to end up where you end up on accident. You're going to wake up in a life that you never intended. You're going to wake up to find yourself in a situation that you never dreamed of. Why is that? I think a lot of it is that we have this idea in our minds that if we have the right intentions, if our heart's in the right place, if we're doing our best, it's going to work out for us. We're going to find where we want to go. We're going to end up in a good place. But I don't really see that in the Bible. Like, the Bible, instead, what it really paints is a picture of two paths. It paints a picture of the wise path and the foolish path. And that's what I want to look at today. I want to look at the wise path. I want to look at the foolish path. And then I want to look at the fork in the road. I want to look at these two paths and then the choice that we have as we kind of come to that moment of decision. And I'm going to do this by looking at Proverbs chapter 7. If you were here last week, you know who wrote the book of Proverbs. King Solomon wrote the book of Proverbs. His dad was King David, who slayed the giant Goliath. You probably remember that story. And Solomon's journey to wisdom started at a young age. He became a king really young, probably like age 20. And he quickly realized they had no idea what he was doing. He was super overwhelmed. And so he fell on his knees and he asked God for help. God, I need help. And God responded in the most amazing way. He said, you know what, Solomon, whatever you want, ask it and I'll give it to you. This is like the genie in a bottle moment. This is the moment we all hope for in our lives. This is the moment we wish that would happen. Like if God asked you that and you had this moment, what would you pick? Would you pick fame or money or long life? Well, Solomon, this 20-year-old, could have had any of those things, but instead Solomon chose wisdom in his life. And we all know, if you read the rest of the story, Solomon was far from perfect, but Solomon made the perfect choice in this moment. And because of that choice, God said, I'm going to give you all the other things you didn't ask for as well. God said, son, I'm going to give you wisdom, but I'm also going to give you fame and money and long life and victory over your enemies as well. The Bible describes Solomon as the wisest man who ever lived, apart from Jesus himself. And he wrote the book that we're going to be studying this whole month, and he took all this wisdom that he had and he put it in the book of Proverbs. Now, chapter 7 in Proverbs does an amazing job of illustrating this principle that we're going to be talking about today, the path principle. And so if you have your Bibles, you want to open them up. Otherwise, it'll be on the screens. This is Proverbs chapter 7, and this kind of sets up the choice between the wise path and the foolish path really well. So start in verse 1. My son, keep my words and store up my commandments within you. Keep my commandments and you will live. Guard my teaching as the apple of your eye. Bind them to your fingers. Write them on the tablet of your heart. Say to wisdom, you are my sister. Say to insight, you are my relative. And they will keep you from the adulterous woman, from the wayward woman with her seductive words. So Solomon starts this, and he's talking to his son. He wants to pass this wisdom that he's found down to his son, and he thinks that's really important. And he does this by talking about these two women here. He talks about the path of wisdom as a woman, and says, she's your sister. And then he talks about the path of foolishness and says she's an adulteress. And then he does, the rest of this chapter kind of unpacks these two choices, the path of wisdom and the path of foolishness. And he does this by talking through a story and telling us a story. Now, if you were here last week, most Proverbs, and if you read the rest of the book of Proverbs, are actually usually short, kind of one-line, nuggets of wisdom, really. It's like wisdom in 140 characters, the original tweet. That's what Proverbs usually is. But this is actually one of the only stories, narrative sections that we find in Scripture. And so Solomon describes this kind of scene that he sees as he's standing at a window overlooking his kingdom as the sun is setting in the evening. And below him, he can see a scene unfolding, and he describes this young man and the paths that he has. And so we're going to look at this first path here as we start this, and this is the fool's path. And we see this starting in verse 6. At the window of my house, I looked down through the lattice. I saw among the simple, I noticed among the young men, a youth who had no sense. A youth who had no sense. Solomon starts this whole section in talking about the fool and that path. And you notice he doesn't say, you know what, I noticed from my window the evil one. You know, he doesn't say, I noticed from my window a wicked man. No, he just says, I noticed from my window someone who had no sense. He was a simple one. And so basically he's just saying this kid was just kind of naive. He lacked some judgment. He might not have even had bad intentions or the wrong idea, but he was going the wrong direction, which we're going to find out here. And before I go into the rest of this, let me just say, to the ladies in the room, this is written from a dad to his son, so obviously it's directed to guys, but I really think these roles could be reversed just as easily, and the message that we find here in this chapter could just as easily apply to women. And it's really this picture that we're looking at is anyone who lacks wisdom. It's anyone who hasn't bothered to gain wisdom, either guys or girls. And so that's what we're going to see starting in verse 8 when he says this. He says, he was going down the street near her corner, walking along in the direction of her house at twilight as the day was fading, as the dark of night set in. So just kind of imagine the scene with me for a second here, right? It's twilight, which is otherwise known as magic hour. You know, that perfect time whenever you could take any picture, doesn't matter, it looks great. And you're just like, man, I'm a really great photographer. Everything I'm doing, it looks really, really good. You take a picture during magic hour, you want to post it to Instagram, hashtag no filter, so that's what we're looking at. This is magic hour. He's walking down the street in the middle of magic hour, and as the sun is setting, he's cruising towards this house. You don't have to be a Bible scholar to know where this is heading, do you, right? I mean, you can kind of start to see what's going on here. He's heading on this path. He doesn't even really know where this path is headed yet. And that's the perfect picture of the fool's path in my mind. And that's what we see as the dark of night sets in, his eyes lock on her eyes. In verse 16, then out came a woman to meet him, dressed like a prostitute and with crafty intent. She is unruly and defiant. Her feet never stay at home. Now in the street and in the squares, at every corner she lurks. She took hold of him and kissed him, and with a brazen face said, today I fulfilled my vows. I have food for my fellowship offering at home, so I came out to meet you. I looked for you, and I have found you. The beauty of the night and the beauty of this woman kind of just catch this guy off guard, and she floats right up to him, look at him right deep in the eyes, and then kisses him right on the mouth. And he's shocked. He doesn't quite know how to handle this. And then she kind of steps back for a minute. She drops this weird pickup line, which probably deserves a little explanation because it's a little bit odd. She says, I have food from my fellowship offering at home. First off, what she was basically saying is, listen, I want you to know this. I have money. I have a house. I'm not like a hooker here or anything. I don't want your money. What I want is you. That's what I want. And she says, and she talks about this offering. She's basically talking about going to church. That's a little weird to bring up church in the middle of this moment. That's kind of a strange thing to think about. But what she's basically saying there, she's saying, listen, I've taken care of my sins today, and I have no regrets. And I'm not going to have any regrets after tonight either. Now, I know this sounds a little weird, but I think we kind of do this too. I think sometimes we go to church and we think we have a license to sin at that point. We think, hey, I went to church on Sunday, so I can go out on Monday and God might kind of turn a blind eye to what's happening. So that's kind of what she's getting at here. Now, if that doesn't sound crazy enough, it does actually get crazier, and that's what we see in verse 16. I have covered my bed with colored linens from Egypt. I have perfumed my bed with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon. Nothing like a little myrrh and aloes to set the mood, right? Come, let's drink deeply of love till morning. Let us enjoy ourselves with love. My husband is not at home. He has gone on a long journey, and he took his purse filled with money, and he will not be home until full moon. Whoa, like good thing we kind of released the kids already. This is not a PG story at this point, right? Not only is this woman coming on to him, but she's married too. And oh, by the way, my husband's not going to be home for a long time. As if this guy needed any more convincing. I don't think he really did at that point. And the fool's path we see here ends at the house of a harlot because he walks his life with no specific direction. You know, he doesn't really know where he wants to go. Even if he does know where he wants to go, he hasn't thought about how to get there. He's just kind of wandering as he goes about. And it doesn't matter what direction this guy intended to go. Like the path he was on led to this moment in time. You know, from the perspective of the young fool, this couldn't have gone any better. He was pretty excited about the way this was happening. But Solomon was stepping back and he was at this window and he had a different perspective. And that leads me now to talk about the wise path. So we saw the fool, and we saw kind of what that looked like, as clueless as he was. The wise path stands at a different vantage point. Solomon was kind of saw where this guy was headed, and he was up in this window looking, and from a different vantage point, and this was his take on what was actually happening. And he says this in verse 21. With persuasive words, she led him astray. She seduced him with her smooth talk. All at once he followed her, like an ox going to the slaughter, like a deer stepping into a noose, till an arrow pierces his liver, like a bird darting into a snare, little knowing it will cost him his life. So she moves her hands and runs them down his arms, and then her fingers reach for his hands, and she starts to kind of take him upstairs. And then it says, all at once. And you think, okay, like the scene from the movie is going to continue. If this was a movie, you know, that's what you would expect. But it takes a very sudden and very different turn right in this point, right? This story goes from like aloed sheets to a noose really fast right here. That was the change. It went from like, my husband's not home, and then all of a sudden arrows in your liver. Like that's all at once, it says, okay? Now, but we know this wasn't all at once. I mean, we saw the story. That's the whole point. No, this started with this path that he chose way back here, and that's the first thing that we see when we look at the wise path and we understand. Wisdom understands that every decision that you're making, you're choosing to take a path, not just choosing to participate in one event. This guy saw this as an event. It was a one-time thing, but he was choosing a path that ultimately led him to death. And that's what the wise man sees. He sees the deeper truth in the situations of life, not just the emotions that we're feeling in the middle of a decision. And through all of this, you see this urgency start to pick up here, because there's these decisions that they're making, that it's a choice between wisdom and folly, and Solomon realizes here that this is a life and death choice. Solomon desperately wants his son to get this, and so much so he uses like a bunch of gruesome images, one right after another. He says, it's like an ox going to slaughter. If that wasn't enough, it's like a deer being shot with an arrow. Or how about a bird caught in a snare? Can you hear his urgency here in this moment? The wise man knows what path he's on. He's given thought to where that path leads him in life. And before he starts sprinting to the goal line, he's making sure that he's facing the right direction in life. He's not just saying, where am I? He's also saying, where am I going? Where is this path leading me? And that's the crucial question that leads me to the fork in the road. So we've talked about the fool's path. We get a picture of that. We get a picture of the wise path. Now I want to take a moment to look at that point where we're going to make a choice between these two paths. Solomon does this too in this passage, and he kind of backs up in this moment and he addresses a wider audience. And so this is written to you and this is written to me this morning. Now then, my sons, listen to me. Pay attention to what I say. Do not let your heart turn to her ways or stray into her paths. He's saying, remember this word paths here. He's talking about the fork. Don't choose that path, he's saying. Many are the victims she has brought down. Her slain are a mighty throng. Solomon is basically saying, listen, this path that you're on, the fool's path, it's well worn. You may have never felt this way before, but lots of other people have. And if you were to ask them to pull up a stool and tell you their stories, you might think twice about the direction that you're on. And then we hear this in verse 27. Her house is a highway to the grave, leading down to the chambers of death. Solomon's like, listen, you aren't just on the wrong path. You're on the wrong highway. It's like the turnpike to the grave, and you're jumping through the easy pass lane right now. That's what he's basically saying. Don't stray to her path. And so the first thing that we need to realize about the fork in the road and the choice between the wise path and the foolish path is that one is really, really easy and really, really common and really, really wide. And then the other path is really difficult. The wise path is really hard sometimes. And Solomon basically calls one the highway to hell. And he had that way before AC/DC did, all right? And he says her house is a highway to the grave. Solomon saw it all happen. He saw this disconnect between this guy's intention and his direction in life as he stood back from the window. The wise man had a different perspective on what was going on. He didn't just look at the step in front of him. He made choices not just based on the feelings that he had that day, but he saw the choice and the wisdom, the choice between wisdom and foolishness with clarity. And that sounds so easy. We all understand that. It sounds easy to us, but we all have this knack for doing the wrong thing, for choosing the wrong path in our lives. And I think sometimes we see it in other people's lives. We can look around from our windows and kind of see other people making these choices, but we totally miss it in our lives. And we can look out and we can see the young woman who says, this is the kind of relationship I want. I want a guy who has the same standards as me. I want a guy who believes in God. I want a guy who can pray with me. That's her intention. But then she operates her life by saying, if he's cute and he asks me out, I'm going. That's the way that she makes her decision. If he's cute, he asks me out, I'm going. And then she ends up with all these terrible relationships. And she ends up in a bad place and brokenhearted again and again. She can't understand why. Or the single guy who says, you know what, I want a great sex life after I'm married. But then he gets his idea of what sex actually is by looking at porn sites. Or how about the couple who says, you know what, I want our kids to have a relationship with Jesus. But then they don't take the time to actually bring their kids to church every week. Or how about the high school student says, I want to go to blank college. That's my intention. But then whenever the time comes to actually study for a test, they forget. Or the man who says, I want to stay healthy for my grandkids, but then neglects their health. Or the parent who says, I want to have this great connection with my kids, but then never finds the time to spend with them to have a conversation. Listen, I know life can be tough. That's why this stuff happens. I totally get it. No one plans it. This is not a guilt trip by any stretch because I'm right there with you as I read that list. But every day you stand at the fork in the road. Every day is a new day to decide what direction that you want to go. And our path is going to go somewhere. The road you're on is going to lead somewhere. And your direction, not your intention, is going to determine your destination, where you're going to go. And so there's these places. So let me just ask you this as you think about that. As you think about the places in your life, where are they? What are the places in your life? There's a disconnect between where you want to be and the way that you're living. Where is there places in your life where if you were to sit down and you were to think about it, maybe you're being seduced down a path, and if you were to take it to its logical conclusion, it would end in a very bad place. I once heard a pastor tell this story about someone he was struggling with his 10-year-old son, and his son just would refuse to listen. They were having problems with behaviors at school, and they tried everything. They tried all kinds of things, and eventually this guy got to the point of frustration with his 10-year-old son, and he sat him down at the dining room table, and he said, listen, this is the way it is, okay? It's like this, son. You're coming down your life, and you get to this point right here. And you just have to decide, do you want to do the right thing, and that's over here? Or do you want to do the wrong thing, and that's over here? And then whenever you stand there, just go this way. Do the right thing. That's all I'm asking you. And guess what? Whenever you do this, your mom and I are going to be happy. You're not going to get grounded. This is going to be a good thing for you, right? And so the son kind of looked at this, and he said, well, Dad, that's kind of the way it is, but it's actually more like this. Took the paper on the dining room table and turned it on its side. And he said, it's kind of like this, Dad, actually. Like, I'm coming down the path, and when I get here, this is just so much easier. It's downhill. I just go right down here, and this is really, really hard. I have to go all the way up there. And then what happens is I get right here, and I'm just like, I don't know. I've already made a mistake. I've already messed up. I'd have to go way back up there. That seems really hard. So I just keep going the wrong way. That's just my game plan at that point. So, I don't know where you are, but, maybe you feel like you're down here and you've chosen the wrong path in your life, and you're not sure if you can ever get back to where you want to be in your life. Can I just say that you can't change your destination in life overnight, but you can change your direction. You can change the decisions that you're making today. You can shift the path that you're on. As hard as it might feel, as tough as it is to live out at times, as far down this one path that you might feel in life, it's not too late for you. Every day you stand at this point, the fork in the road. We can decide between wisdom and foolishness. Solomon, he concludes everything that he talked about in chapter 7 and the following chapter, in chapter 8. And he talks about this fork in the road and literally talks about this intersection and crossroads in life. And so as we wrap up the message, I just want to read this. This is Solomon's words. Does not wisdom call out? Does not understanding raise her voice? At the highest point along the way where the paths meet, she takes her stand. Beside the gate leading into the city, at the entrance, she cries aloud. To you, O people, I call out. I raise my voice to all mankind. You who are simple, gain prudence. You who are foolish, set your hearts on it. Crossroads, we stand at the fork in the road, and there are two choices. One leads to death, and the other one leads to life. It leads to hope. It leads to joy. And at the highest point along the way where the paths meet, at this intersection, at this crossroads of choice, wisdom is calling out. Wisdom is calling you today. So let's set our hearts on that. Let me pray. Lord, we just thank you for giving us the strength to make the right choice, even when it's difficult, even in the moments where that moment of decision is really, really hard, and the one seems downhill, and the one seems easy, and the other one is so hard, and yet the one leads to life, Lord. And so, Lord, we just pray for wisdom in that moment. We just pray that we could set our eyes on you, we could set our eyes on the destination, and fix our eyes on Jesus. And in the midst of all of that, Lord, that he would be our true north, that we would head exactly where we need to be because we have our eyes fixed on Jesus. So, Lord, give us strength. Allow us to live this out in our lives. Thank you for who you are, and thank you for what you've done through Jesus Christ. We all say, amen.